Welcome to this short presentation of my job market paper. My name is Henning Hermes and I'm currently an assistant professor at NHH Bergen. My job market paper is joint work with three fantastic colleagues, Philipp Lergetporer, Frauke Peter and Simon Wiederhold. And in this paper, we tackle the question of what determines socioeconomic gaps that we observe in childcare enrollment. Now, why is this interesting? Well, first of all, there is mounting evidence that early educational investments such as childcare can promote children's outcomes. And these effects are found to be especially large for disadvantaged children. So in essence, these investments provide a means to foster equality of opportunity early on. And that's one of the reasons why many countries have expanded universal childcare across the last decade. However, and that's the challenge, we also see that children that are disadvantaged or have a lower socioeconomic status, I will often use SCS as an abbreviation here, these kids are less likely to attend childcare. So that in essence kind of questions the effect that would equalize opportunities for children early on. And it's very important for us to understand why we see this enrollment gap in childcare take-up. However, we don't know anything about the causal determinants of this gap. And that's where our paper steps in. We basically hypothesize that this gap is partially determined by behavioral barriers. And we conduct an RCT that removes these barriers in form of a behavioral intervention by providing information and application assistance to parents. And then we measure whether that affects whether they apply for a childcare slot or whether the child is actually enrolled in a childcare slot. Now, why do we think that behavioral barriers are especially relevant in this setting? Well, especially for lower SES parents, we should see, or we hypothesize, that they might lack information about the childcare system, they might lack information how to apply for a childcare slot, and they might simply be overwhelmed with all the paperwork and the forms and everything that needs to be done to get a slot and to apply for cost reduction, for example. It's also something that they might forget deadlines and they might forget about the days they can visit the childcare center. And a final thing is that the childcare market is rationed. So there is much more demand than there is supply. So parents will frequently receive setbacks, rejections, and the whole process will be frustrating. So it requires a lot of self-regulation to keep going. And that's where we step in with this application assistance to support parents that are just giving up. Okay. So what did we do exactly? We conducted a field experiment in two large cities in Western Germany. The project was pre-registered at the AA registry, and there's also a pre-analysis plan that lays out how we analyze our data. We sample more than 600 families that have a child aged between 0 and 1 year, so super young, at the beginning of the study. And we sample them from a full age cohort in these two cities, which is very nice, as you will see later. And we sample around 25% of this age cohort. We need a large share of lower SES parents, and we invest a lot of effort to get them. And we see that our sample contains 42% of parents that do not have a college entrance degree, which is our definition for lower SES that we use. And this compares very well to the general German population, where we see a similar share of parents being lower SES. Now, what do we do? The treatment consists of two components. We show the parents that are selected for the treatment group a 4-minute video with very simple information about the childcare system, for example, that they have a legal entitlement for a slot. And we show this video at the end of the baseline interview, so we know that parents have seen it. And then as a second component, parents are offered personal assistance for childcare applications, for example, by filling out forms or searching for nearby childcare centers. And this is obviously an opt-in design. So we see 1 out of 3 parents that take up this assistance. We measure our outcomes in a follow-up 9 months after the intervention. It's actually somewhat more. So it's a long time until we measure our effects. And we do all kinds of stuff to make effects kind of measurable in a better way. So we stratify our randomization. We see there's a good balance at baseline. We have a very low attrition given the high share of lower SES parents in the sample. So we find more than 85% of the sample, and attrition is random. Now, what do we find? So the main result is that our treatment group, lower SES parents have applied much more and are enrolled much more for childcare. So you see the gray bars plotting the effects for application in the left-hand panel and for enrollment in the childcare center. This is the SES gap in the control group. So the motivation story is kind of replicated in our setting. There's a large SES gap in application and enrollment for lower versus higher SES parents. And this is 22 percentage points for applications. And we see that the treatment effect on lower SES parents is about the same size. So this is a substantial treatment effect of such a small intervention. We also see that the green bar, which is not a bar really because it's almost zero, is very small. So there is no effect of our treatment on higher SES parents for these outcomes. We see some effects on other outcomes, but this is not discussed in this presentation. For enrollment, we see that the SES gap is even larger, and the treatment effect for lower SES parents amounts to 16 percentage points. So there's still a substantial effect, but it doesn't seem to be the same size than for application. And I could now tell you a lot more about detailed results, but I will point you to one specific analysis, which I think is very interesting. And that relates to the fact that we don't see this full translation. So there is no full translation of the application effect into enrollment. And one reason for that could be that supply side constraints are binding. I mentioned that the German market is pretty rationed, so there's actually more demand than supply. And this could be an explanation why we don't see the full translation. Now, our setting provides very nice data to kind of analyze whether this could be the case. And what we do is we use the information that we have from the full age cohort. So we know the exact location of all the parents in our sample, all the other parents in this cohort, and we know the exact locations of all the childcare centers. So what we do is we basically make a heat map that shows you where the competition for childcare slots is very intense. And then we just do a median split in the sample, looking at parents that are in a more competitive area, so where there's fewer centers per child versus those that are in a low competitive area. And that I will show you in the table here. So you can see the treatment effects on lower SES parents in the first row here, and these are measured in percentage points. What you see is that there's a way larger effect on both applications and enrollment into childcare in the higher competitive areas. So you see that there's a small but insignificant effect in low competitive areas, but the main areas where treatment effects occur seem to be highly competitive areas. And this is suggestive, at least, for the treatment helping lower SES parents to apply and also enroll into childcare, especially in areas where it's difficult to get a slot. And that is, of course, very important for policymakers. Now, we do a lot more in the paper, and I would be happy if you take a look. So we show some treatment effects on the knowledge about childcare systems, on application behavior. We do more in terms of heterogeneity. We have robustness checks. So I invite you to read more about this in my job market paper. Let me just quickly summarize for this video. What we did is we conduct a large randomized control trial, removing behavioral barriers for childcare applications and enrollment to reduce the SES gap. And what we find is that 9 months after the intervention, there's a strong increase in both application, more than 20 percentage points, and enrollment, more than 15 percentage points, for childcare for lower SES families. And that, of course, means a lot in terms of policy implications, but let me just quickly try to coin it in one sentence. So we argue that this is evidence supporting the view that the socioeconomic gap in childcare enrollment is at least partially driven by behavioral barriers. And any policies aiming to overcome these barriers, think of simplifying applications, making them more central, more fair, would also be a means to foster equality of opportunity early on. That was all I wanted to say in this short video. Thanks a lot for your attention. And I'm very happy if you check out the job market paper on my website. I would also like to give credits to my fantastic co-authors, Philipp, Frauke, and Simon. Thanks for watching.